After losing at Pharsalus, Pompey fled to Egypt, hoping his old allies would give him shelter. Instead, the advisors of 14-year-old King Ptolemy XIII decided the best way to win Caesar's favor was to hand him Pompey's head. The moment Pompey stepped off the ship, they grabbed him and killed him. Caesar soon followed him into Alexandria. He brought only a small force, 3,200 infantry from the 6th and 27th legions and 800 cavalry, relying more on his personal authority and Rome's prestige than on sheer numbers. When he arrived, Alexandria was already caught up in a dynastic struggle. The recently deceased king of Egypt had left a will naming his elder children, his son Ptolemy and his daughter Cleopatra, as joint heirs. In it, he asked the Roman Senate and people to make sure his wishes were carried out. That wording gave Caesar an official excuse to step in. He wanted to stabilize Egypt and secure a dependable ally for the future. And he couldn't afford a drawn-out conflict there. Rome relied heavily on grain shipments from the Nile Valley. Tensions flared right from the start. As soon as Caesar stepped ashore, he had his lictors march ahead with the fasces, the rods and axes that signified Roman authority. To the people of Alexandria, that looked like an open insult to their king's sovereignty. Egypt might have been a long-standing client state of Rome, but it was still officially an independent kingdom, not a Roman province, and such a bold entrance angered people across the city. Ptolemy's advisors had completely misread the situation. When Caesar reached Alexandria, they handed him Pompey's severed head and his signet ring. Ancient writers tell us that Caesar wept at the sight and turned away in disgust. Whether those tears were genuine is a matter of debate, but his reaction made one thing clear. He expected a former Roman consul and citizen to be treated with dignity, not butchered. He ordered Pompey's remains returned to him and gave him a proper burial with all of the customary rites. After that, Caesar demanded that Egypt repay its debts to Rome, more than 10 million denarii, an enormous sum equal to roughly a year's income for a wealthy province. Ptolemy XIII, still just a boy, wasn't really ruling Egypt at all. He was a figurehead controlled by 3 men: the eunuch Pothinus, the general Achillas, and his tutor Theodatus. Earlier that year, they had pushed his older sister and co-ruler Cleopatra out of power and driven her from Alexandria. Cleopatra, only 21, was camped near Pelusium with a force of mercenaries, unable to return because Ptolemy's troops blocked every route to the capital. When she heard that Caesar had arrived, she instantly recognized her chance to take back the throne. She needed to see him before Ptolemy's advisors could turn him against her. But how could a deposed queen get into a city where assassins lurked at every intersection? Plutarch tells the famous story. Under cover of night, Cleopatra and her servant Apollodorus crossed the harbor in a small fishing boat. Near the royal palace, Apollodorus wrapped her in a linen sack, tied it shut, and carried her on his shoulders through the palace gates, past the guards, and straight into Caesar's chambers. Once inside, he loosened the rope, and the Queen of Egypt emerged. Despite the modern image of Cleopatra as a great beauty, she wasn't considered especially attractive by ancient standards. Many historians note that her appearance was fairly ordinary. What made her stand out was her intelligence and charisma. She spoke 9 languages, including Egyptian, becoming the first Ptolemy in 300 years to actually learn the language of the people she ruled. She also had what Plutarch called an irresistible charm in conversation. Caesar, 52 years old at the time, didn't stand a chance. Within days, they were both lovers and political allies. When 14-year-old Ptolemy learned that his sister had met with Caesar, he threw his diadem to the ground and publicly accused her of treason. Caesar, acting as the executor of their father's will, declared that Ptolemy and Cleopatra were meant to rule jointly and urged them to come to an agreement. Cleopatra regained the throne, and Caesar gained a dependable ally for securing Rome's grain supply. But Pothinus had no intention of giving up his power. He secretly sent orders to General Achillas to march the Egyptian army toward Alexandria. Achillas arrived at Alexandria with a huge army, more than 20,000 infantry and 2,000 cavalry, 6 times Caesar's force. Many of his men were veterans of the Roman general Gabinius, who had restored Ptolemy XII to the throne 7 years earlier. For Caesar, it was the worst possible scenario. He was outnumbered 6-1, trapped inside a hostile foreign city, and facing opponents who knew Roman battlefield tactics as well as he did. With no way to defend the whole city, Caesar focused on the royal quarter. He ordered key streets walled off, effectively turning the district into a fortified stronghold. He controlled about 20% of Alexandria, the palace complex, part of the harbor, and later the lighthouse on the island of Pharos. The Egyptians held everything else and immediately began building massive defenses, triple walls more than 12 meters high, topped with siege towers as tall as 10-story buildings. Right at the start of the fighting, in the chaos, Caesar took a drastic step. The Egyptian fleet in the Great Harbor could cut him off from reinforcements and supplies, so a team of his legionaries carried out a sabotage mission, setting the ships on fire. Between 50 and 100 well-equipped quinquiremes and quadriremes were burned to the waterline. The immediate goal was achieved, but the fire spread past the docks and into the city. Flames reached the warehouses near the museum and the library of Alexandria, the greatest repository of knowledge in the ancient world. What exactly was lost in the fire remains one of history's most painful mysteries. The ancient writer Seneca, citing Livy, claimed that more than 40,000 priceless scrolls were destroyed, though that would have been only 5 to 10% of the library's total holdings. When Caesar discovered that Pothinus had secretly been communicating with Achillas, he had the eunuch executed. But soon after, Cleopatra's younger sister, Arsinoe, escaped the palace with her tutor Ganymedes, also a eunuch, and reached the Egyptian army. The soldiers proclaimed the 17-year-old Arsinoe their queen, giving their revolt a sense of legitimacy. She immediately ordered Achillas executed and appointed Ganymedes as commander-in-chief. The resistance now had a new ruler and new leadership, but the change only deepened the chaos. Their seasoned general was gone, replaced by a court tutor with no real military experience. The Pharos lighthouse became the symbolic heart of the entire conflict. More than 100 meters tall, built in 3 tapering tiers with a constant flame at its summit, it dominated the Great Harbor and controlled every approach from the sea. Caesar knew he had to secure it to keep his supply lines open, and he left a quarter of his troops to defend the royal quarter. And with the rest, he crossed the harbor and personally led the landing on the island. The Egyptians resisted fiercely, but they were only a few hundred against 3,000 Romans. Within hours, the Romans had captured the lighthouse and one of the Heptastadian forts, the massive causeway that linked the island to the mainland. Caesar then ordered the shoreline fortified to prevent an Egyptian landing and moved to seize the fort on the other side of the causeway. His goal was to block the archway at the center of the Heptastadion, which allowed ships to pass between Alexandria's 2 harbors. At that moment, the Egyptians counterattacked from both land and sea. Infantry advanced along the causeway, while ships from the western harbor swept in from the water. Caesar ordered a retreat, but the legionaries trapped between the 2 attacking fronts panicked, and many were cut down. Caesar himself had to swim for his life, covering more than 200 meters while holding important documents above the water with one hand, until a Roman galley finally pulled him aboard. On shore, The Romans managed to regroup and hold both the island fort and the lighthouse, but the losses were devastating. Caesar lost around 800 men, nearly a quarter of his entire force. The Egyptians captured his purple cloak, the one he always wore in battle so his soldiers could easily spot him, and paraded it through Alexandria as a trophy, proclaiming that Caesar had been killed. It was the most humiliating moment of his career. The general who had conquered Gaul, driven the Senate out of Italy, and defeated Pompey the Great had nearly died in a street fight over a narrow strip of stone. After the disaster at the Heptastadion, envoys from the people of Alexandria came to Caesar. They begged him to release the young Ptolemy, complaining about the tyranny of Arsinoe and Ganymedes, and insisting that the rightful king could restore peace. Caesar suspected a trap. He later wrote that he had understood from the start that the moment the boy was freed, he would take command of the Egyptian forces as their legitimate ruler. Even so, Caesar agreed, hoping that internal divisions among the Egyptians would work in his favor. And that is exactly what happened. The moment Ptolemy crossed the Roman lines, he took command of the Egyptian army and renewed the siege with fresh fury. The siege dragged on through the winter. Caesar was confined to Alexandria, but he continued receiving reinforcements and supplies by sea, and the Egyptians couldn't force him to surrender. Meanwhile, disorder was growing in Rome due to Mark Antony's careless administration. The Pompeian faction, which Caesar had believed defeated, was regrouping in North Africa, near the remains of Carthage. Every day spent in Alexandria cost Caesar political authority and strategic ground. The Egyptian episode was dragging on, turning more and more into a disaster. But suddenly, in March of 47 BC, scouts brought unexpected news. Reinforcements were approaching from Syria. Mithridates of Pergamon, the son of Rome's old enemy Mithridates VI Eupator, spent the winter gathering a coalition to aid Caesar. He managed to unite the forces of several Hellenistic rulers, the troops of Iamblichus I of Emesa, Ptolemy of Etruria and Chalcis, and a contingent from Judea sent by the high priest Hyrcanus II. That force was led by an Edomite named Antipater, the future father of Herod the Great. In early March, Mithridates' coalition army captured Pelusium, the fortress guarding Egypt's northeastern frontier. From there, the army marched west towards the delta, its numbers growing as Jewish communities in Egypt sent men to join them. A battle soon followed between the coalition and the Egyptians, but neither side emerged with a clear victory. Both took heavy losses, yet remained capable of fighting and withdrew in relatively good order. When Caesar learned that reinforcements were approaching, he left a small garrison in Alexandria and sailed with his main force to join Mithridates. It was a calculated risk. If the Alexandrians broke through his defenses, Caesar would lose everything. And if Ptolemy crushed the allied army first, Caesar would be trapped in the city for good. The two armies had to reunite before the Egyptians could destroy them, one by one. Young Ptolemy marched out with the main Egyptian army to stop Mithridates from crossing the Nile. That gave Caesar and Mithridates the chance to coordinate their attacks and catch Ptolemy's forces in a pincer. The fighting was brutal, but brief. Once trapped, Ptolemy XIII's army collapsed. During the chaotic retreat, the 15-year-old king tried to escape by boat, but so many terrified soldiers crowded aboard that it capsized. The young ruler drowned in the sacred Nile, dragged under by either his armor or his royal ornaments. Ganymedes also died in the battle, either killed outright or drowned with the fleeing troops. Caesar then marched back to Alexandria. The city surrendered without resistance. After 6 months of siege, daily clashes, hunger, and constant humiliation, Caesar finally brought Egypt under his control. Caesar left Cleopatra on the throne as co-ruler with her youngest brother, 12-year-old Ptolemy XIV, whom she could easily control. 3 Roman legions remained in Alexandria to protect the new regime, effectively turning Egypt into a Roman protectorate, even though the outward appearance of independence was still maintained. Cleopatra became the true ruler of Egypt, though her power ultimately rested on Roman swords. Her sister Arsinoe was sent to Rome as a prisoner of war. In 46 BC, Caesar paraded her through the streets during his triumph. She walked in chains behind a burning model of the Pharos lighthouse. Normally, captured monarchs were executed after the procession, but Caesar spared her and granted her sanctuary at the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus. But the mercy didn't last. 5 years after Caesar's death, Arsinoe was murdered on the temple steps on Cleopatra's orders, eliminating her last rival. Even in Rome, the act caused outrage. Violating sanctuary was considered sacrilege. But Cleopatra was ruthless. In the Ptolemaic dynasty, survival left no room for mercy. By the time Caesar announced his victory, Cleopatra was already pregnant by him, and soon after, she gave birth to a boy named Caesarion, Little Caesar, also known as Ptolemy XV. He was the only known biological son of Caesar, though he never officially acknowledged paternity. While Caesar was in Egypt, supporters of the defeated Pompey were regrouping in the African provinces, backed by King Juba of Numidia. Yet after spending several months in Egypt, when Caesar finally left Alexandria in June 47 BC, he did not march westward toward his enemies. Instead, he headed northeast to Asia. The reason was Pharnaces. Pharnaces II, king of the Bosporan kingdom and son of Mithridates VI, the former ruler of Pontus and once one of Rome's most dangerous enemies, decided to exploit the civil war, tearing apart his old adversaries and rebuild his father's former empire. He overran all of Pontus and invaded Bithynia. Domitius Calvinus, governor of the province of Asia, could not allow Rome's allies to be attacked by the son of a man who had once inflicted such disastrous defeats on the Republic. Calvinus hastily gathered every available soldier, 4 legions and auxiliary troops, and marched against Pharnaces. The two forces clashed near the city of Nicopolis. In the bloody battle, Pharnaces was won decisively, dealing heavy losses to Calvinus. 1 legion was almost annihilated, and 2 others were badly mauled. The remnants of Domitius's army were forced to retreat in a haste. On the way toward the province of Asia, after settling urgent matters in Syria, Caesar arrived in Cilicia with a small force. There he joined what remained of Calvinus's army, along with a modest reinforcement. Pharnaces sent an embassy to Caesar asking for peace. Caesar agreed to pardon all his offenses on the condition that he withdraw from Pontus. But Pharnaces, knowing that Caesar was eager to return to Rome, where his presence was urgently needed, began stalling for time. He kept sending new embassies that supposedly needed to clarify Caesar's orders, trying in every way to avoid carrying them out. Eventually, Caesar's patience ran out. He decided to force a battle. The 2 armies met near the town of Zela, where in a short but fierce fight, Caesar won a decisive victory. He informed the Senate of the outcome with 3 famous words: Veni, vidi, vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. After this, Caesar traveled through Greece to Italy and then on to Rome, where he had long been urgently needed. While Caesar had been fighting Pompey, Ptolemy, and Pharnaces, Rome had been governed by Antony, and his rule had been far from exemplary. Antony lived in luxury, grew notorious for his greed, and enriched himself by reselling the property of Pompey's supporters who had fled the city. More than once, unrest broke out in Rome itself. Caesar had barely begun to put affairs in order after his return when a new disaster had struck. His own legions rebelled. Back home at last, the veterans relaxed, felt the weight of fatigue from endless marches, hardships, and battles. Some had been fighting under Caesar for more than 10 years. So when rumors spread that he was preparing for yet another campaign, their patience snapped. The legionaries mutinied, demanding the money and land that they had been promised. The rebels gathered on the Campus Martius. They drove off the senators and tribunes who had tried to reason with them, and then Caesar himself came out to face them, ignoring the danger posed by an angry armed mob. Climbing onto the platform, he addressed them with a single word: Quirites, citizens. That one word silenced thousands of furious soldiers. By calling them civilians, Caesar made it clear that he no longer considered them soldiers, no longer his comrades in arms, the men he had marched and fought with, the men he had trusted without hesitation. Caesar announced that they were all discharged. They would receive the gifts, pay, and land that they had been promised, but for his next campaign he would recruit others, men more worthy of honor and glory. These words shocked the veterans so deeply that by the end of the day, a delegation of the former mutineers came to him with apologies, begging to be taken back. They were ready to march with him again. If you made it to the end of this video, we really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. Follow along on our journey through ancient civilizations and history. We put out new episodes every single week. If you'd like to support the channel, join our Patreon or become a YouTube channel member. You get early access to new episodes, behind-the-scenes looks, and more. You can also leave a super thanks below to give us a little extra boost. If you want to listen to history on the go, check out our all-new podcast, Parabellum History. You can find it on all major podcast platforms. Thanks again for tuning in, and we hope to see you next time.